Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwyn. I'm Oliver Gwyn, and this is where we give you our off the cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing data and philosophy. This week, I'm joined by a guest, and when I have a guest on, I don't give them any preparation questions, we don't do any editing, and I just bring whatever I feel like talking about on them. So, with that introduction, I welcome Bram Goosink. I think your second name is pronounced.
Goosink, but any pronunciation is fine by me.
I've never successfully gotten anybody's name right so far. It's becoming embarrassing. How are
Oh,
you?
that's right.
How's things?
Pretty good, pretty good. Calling in from a snowy Netherlands at the moment, which I think is, well, maybe because of global warming, a once in a 10-year occurrence. So I'm pretty excited about it. But other than that, all good here.
Nice. And you are a product manager. What is a product manager? I guess is my first question for the people who don't know.
I'm a product manager, product designer hybrid. So not entirely just product manager. In fact, my background is in product design. But from my perspective, the product manager is someone that's responsible for discovering features that people actually want in a product, or more specifically, making strategic choices for a product and then bringing that down to features, and then making the trade-offs between them in terms of what can be made, what can't be made, and what's actually profitable. If I also summarize it in 2 sentences.
And having a foot in both camps, is that difficult? Because sometimes you have to go, I can probably do that in 3 weeks. And then you go, no, I can't.
To be fair, I'm actually surprised by how much of an overlap there is between both product management and product design. So I would actually say the difference isn't quite as shocking. I think as a designer, you're already thinking about what is feasible. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if we start talking about my nitpick in terms of splitting up desirability, feasibility, and viability between different roles. I think that all falls between the product triad, if not different people thinking about their individual little pillar. And because of that, I think product management and product design are starting to overlap more and more.
Interesting. People often talk about like design philosophy. And whenever they talk about this, it seems to me that they're talking about best practices. And it seems like they're all saying exactly the same thing, but maybe I'm not listening to the right people. What is a design philosophy? How is it different from best practices?
I guess it depends a bit also on how you define best practices, but maybe to start off with, I think the design philosophy is different for each company, and usually it's a set of tenets that that company believes in. So if you're a company like Jaguar and you have the design tenets, make very boxy cars, then that's your design philosophy. Of course, you're going to hope that's a little bit more grounded in user research, but on a high level, a design philosophy is these tenets that you can judge your design against. So if I happen to have made a very curvy car when I'm working at Jaguar, then I know, okay, this is not acceptable according to their philosophy, even though it might be the perfect car for another brand.
How would that differ from sort of a style guideline or something along those lines? What makes it a philosophy versus just a set of principles?
I would say that the philosophy is a little bit more grounded in customer research and market research and things like that. So you would hope that a brand like Jaguar has gone around and asked people, hey, what do you think Jaguar is? It's a brand that's about performance, about comfort, and apparently about boxy cars. So therefore, the boxy car principle might fit in there. Although I agree with you that if you'd say boxy cars, it's also a design choice. But generally, design choice is more of a way in which you would differentiate your brand visually. So a performance car has a very powerful engine. That's not really something you find in the style guide. The style guide will probably say, put V8 badges everywhere. So it's kind of a differentiation between the two.
Maybe you get paid more money if you say the word philosophy a lot. Maybe that's why people say that.
It
You've
sounds smart.
been a freelancer before, I think I'm right in saying, and you've been in-house. What's the difference between those two? Do people have unrealistic expectations in design world for freelancers? It's a
So
bit of a
it's
leading question because I feel like maybe they do.
I would say, so I've been consultant. So consultant in a 5-person consultancy. So I guess that's almost freelance. To me, the main difference is that when you're a consultant, you have to hit the ground running. So you're expected to say something valuable almost on day one. which I think puts consultants in the difficult position of having to say things right there and then that sound correct, even though a couple of weeks later you discover, oh, actually, I was wrong about that. I can't really say that now, though, because they just paid me a ton of money, as opposed to being in-house, where it's acceptable to take a 2-month onboarding period and slowly start to opinionate yourself. But before that, just act as a sponge. And I think you can kind of see that in consultants who come up straight away with frameworks, because that's a great way to sort of dodge that I need to deliver an insightful thing on day one. You can just say, these are processes I've tried at previous companies. This is what I'm going to give you, versus kind of sitting there and asking stupid questions, which are never stupid, of course, but that's the in-house experience, and I quite like that too.
Nice. Interesting. And do you have a preference? Is there anything that you've done in your career that you think, oh, this was really good fun?
If I had to choose between both, it's quite difficult. I like the short in-house stints, which is a bit of a cop-out because it's basically a little bit of both worlds, where you get to really sit as a sponge for 2 months, absorb everything you can, really build up relationships with the people around you. That's something that's also quite hard sometimes as a consultant. And then sit there and within 6 months come with a new product, a new project maybe, and deliver that, and then see that grow and get bought by big customers. Unfortunately, as with most consultancy roles, can't quite chat about those in public, but there are some proud things to have done there. There was a recent role in London where I helped a company called Cycle or Minviro make an LCA tool. I believe we did talk about that in the past at some point. That was a lot of fun.
Cool. I would imagine my controversial viewpoint sometimes is that people hire really great product people and engineers, and they make a really great product. And at that point, those people's job is at risk, or the company doesn't really need them. They only need them to maintain, and they have a tendency of then making enhancements that maybe don't enhance things. They add things onto the product that don't really come back to that core idea. And so I can see the benefit of having sort of freelance people or building something and then leaving. Um, my example to heart is always business Bumble for business, which I always think, who wanted that exactly? But when you've got some expensive product engineers on hand, maybe you think we need to keep these guys busy. Have you ever had situations where you just think this is the perfect product today? I can't add anything to this, or is there always improvements?
I think there is always improvements, but I think that you're right that a lot of companies get into the mindset of I need to add more features. And I think that might be a little bit the mistake. It's more of a refactoring that needs to happen sometimes. So you need to go back and look at maybe something as basic as the settings page that you have that is making it very difficult for people to configure things the way they need. But I also agree you don't need as many people, designers or developers, possibly to do something like that. You might need to let go of half of them, which is unfortunate. But in general, there's always something to improve. And maybe more importantly, markets change, customer demands change, new regulations come about. Someone in penetration testing has noticed something is completely wrong with the product. Things happen all the time, and you do need to be able to respond to those. So there is always space for a designer and a product manager and a developer in a company. But I agree with you that there is this delicate balance between exploration and exploitation. And if you get into the exploitation phase, it becomes less important to keep pressing on new features.
Interesting. Talking of trends, are there any design trends that you particularly have hated or hate at the moment? I have got one to mind, which is not that I hated it, but when Apple first broke onto the scene, every single person seemed to want to copy them by just having a lot of white space and minimal images without realizing that that was not what made Apple successful necessarily. It was a very nice design product, not the bump around it. And so I found that very annoying for like 5 years when everybody thought they could copy Apple.
I think I'm probably in the same boat as you. I can't think of any particular design trend that bothers me. Design trends will bother me if they get in the way of what you're actually trying to deliver. If you're making a dashboard for someone and then you're thinking, oh, it's going to be glass design or glass aesthetics just because that seems to be trending, then I think you're probably on the wrong page. You should be thinking about what the user needs, which in that case is probably clarity and bringing the user's attention to the most important parts on the page rather than the beautiful glass curves. Uh, but any individual design trend or aesthetic, I think, is more of a brand choice. So if the brand believed that was the way they needed to go, so be it. Don't hate them too much.
The trend, of course, at the moment is, can we just make an LLM for seemingly any use case? Just make an LLM. People want that, apparently. And I also think, is that not fraught with danger? Have you had any people asking, hey, now I want to make AI products or integrating AI into things?
Definitely. Probably almost every second conversation that you have. I'm sure you have the same experience working in data. And then the response is always the same. It's like, that's great. AI is a technology, so you're going to have to explain to me what you mean with building an AI tool. And then it just reverts the conversation back to what it would have been before 2021, I think, when AI came out.
I find that I just say no in more creative ways each year. Like, no, you probably can't do that, and maybe that's not the right thing to do, and you don't have the data, and even if you did, OpenAI has like a few £1 billion invested, and you don't, so maybe don't do that. There's a simple solution to the problem, probably.
How do they respond to that?
They kind of go, yeah. I think most people realize that it's a sexy thing, but there's a huge difference between having a ChatGPT wrapper on some data that you plug in and actually making something yourself, which is what people want to do. And unfortunately, there's been an explosion of agencies and consultants that promise AI solutions and cannot deliver them.
Which has been interesting because I think at the beginning it was a lot of, let's say, mostly customers asking about AI features because that was the thing people were asking for in their company. And then as the hype has slowly sort of flattened out, it's been mostly people within the same organization that are asking for AI features. So it's been the shift from, oh, look, the market wants or is asking for AI, that dying out. And now somehow, I think it's the first time I've really seen this, product organizations are lagging behind and starting to own anything about AI features. I don't know if that's something that resonates with you.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's interesting. And in terms of things that you like building or you think should be a trend, is there anything that springs to mind that you just think this is works really well, it's good for the customer, but people aren't really using today?
I would probably say something along the line of data models or object models within design. A lot of problems in software stem from complexity, and I think also the notion you just touch upon, where you have a complete product and now you're just adding features and it's making it worse because you're adding complexity and diluting the effect of your original ideas. I think that's something you can already work with when you're thinking in terms of objects or in terms of data models, and having a common language between your developers and your product or design teammates. Because then it's really easy to point out, hey, look, we are going to connect, let's stick with Jaguar, our navigation with our dashboard, with whatever other objects you might have. And you can start to realize, okay, this means there needs to be a connection between our navigation and our dashboard with our steering wheel lights. And you can really see the complexity that you start to add every time you add a feature, because you get the many handshake problems where every time you add a feature, it needs to connect to all the previous features in order to work properly. And if you map things like that out, especially visually, then at least you can try to isolate certain features from others so they don't overlap and make you have to rethink all the previous interactions, or at least you have that common language to talk with developers so you don't sort of speak on these different terms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. One of the most common complaints I hear from product people and developers is sometimes they have a product, they've got the data on the usage, they know exactly what all the customers want, they get the feedback, and then somebody in management completely ignores them and just goes with their gut. Have you had instances of that, and how did you handle those situations?
Yeah, significantly. They've a couple of times, let's put it that way. Uh, Sometimes it's just accepted. If you're in a big organization, that's just how big organizations work. There are managers that work one way and there are managers that work the other way. And then either you have to get creative and find a manager that understands the way you like to present information, or just realize this might not be the company to take that step and you have to find a different way for them to be more customer centric or more appropriate for their market. And if you don't accept it because you think it's too critical, then you have to reframe it. So almost every manager, even though they say gut feeling, have some kind of metric or some kind of narrative for which they may sway. Often nowadays that is AI. So if you reframe that idea or feedback in the terms of their priority, like AI, then they might just about hook on. But it doesn't always happen.
I think my controversial view on that is quite often the people who complain about this, they don't really understand the full life cycle of the decisions. They don't necessarily understand that, okay, maybe customers want this, but how will it take long will it take to develop that? How long is it going to cost? What's the potential bottom line impact? And those things don't always match up. And that's the reason why, even though the data might show one thing very clearly, actually the manager's probably right to say, but when I think about the larger picture and the development time and the resources available to me, that's not a priority right now. But I can also understand the frustration when you've got clear data that shows something will work and then they just go, nah.
I agree. Although in that sense, I also think as product people who make decisions like that, there's the responsibility for us to explain why we are prioritizing one idea over another. And both people on the table might not always agree, at least having that communication, I think, is quite crucial.
My last question for you was around accessibility. I think it's something that's very important. I'm sure every organization, there's new laws that are coming into place all the time to make every product more accessible. But for smaller organizations, it's really, really difficult, I feel, and really frustrating for me that I can't really go and get user testing from a blind cohort or a deaf cohort or whatever it might be to test my product easily. There's not loads of organizations out there. There are standards, but it's quite difficult to do that testing sometime. And how do you deal with that sort of issue where you want to be accessible, you want to do the right things, but you just can't have access to those people necessarily?
So in some ways, you have to trust the guidelines a bit there, I think, because they are sort of put in place based on tests, let's say, with these kind of cohorts. So the idea is that they cover as big of a potential group of people that might need you to adapt your product to them. But I agree, this is a problem. To be fair, I haven't really thought of a solution for it. So I don't know if you have one. At the current job I have, we're lucky enough that there are a few people that are colorblind and colorblind in different ways. And since we make a lot of dashboards, it's a great way to test if they can spot the most important features on the dashboard, regardless of the colors that we use. But it's a challenge.
Mm.
I would already be super happy to be working at a company that prioritizes accessibility, especially a small one.
Certainly the easiest thing I always used to do was go get my granddad, who is not super computer literate, and say, can you go do this action? And if he could do that, I thought, okay, it's simple enough for him, it's simple enough for most people. And but yeah, I wish I had a bit more time or budget or things like that if I'm developing something to be able to test it properly.
So far we've been talking about the sort of product design side of things. I've always been kind of curious on the data side because we just talked about data models and object models. Is that something you ever talk about when talking with designers, for example, or is that something that stays on the world of data and backend?
It's becoming more and more present in their minds, but I would say in a lot of cases they want the analytics, but they don't necessarily understand what the data model is behind that. I'd say that's maybe a bit rarer. So they want usage analytics, they want usage matched up with lifetime value. They want to know that the people who spend the money, what do they actually want? That's quite a useful thing that we often do for people. I think with Peppa Pig. We saved them loads and loads of development time because they realized that thousands of people wanted X, but actually the people who were paying only wanted Y, and so they only had to work on that. But in terms of data models and object models, yeah, less so. I think they're less familiar with those concepts in a lot of places. Maybe that's because we're mostly dealing with product managers and front end developers, less so than back end developers who understand the events that are being fired and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's also something I sometimes struggle to to bring across to developers, that a designer is interested in data models. They kind of look at me glassy-eyed, wondering what happened. But the nice thing is that it forces the visualization of data models, and suddenly everyone around the table understands conversations about data. And so it's something I keep trying now.
Yeah, that's the main thing is when you can understand what the events are that need to fire, and then how you're going to capture them and model them, and how the different ones can work together. Then everybody can easily understand. Just takes a bit of prep work to understand that this is not just a magic number that appears on your dashboard. It's actually a bit of a process, and it needs to be validated and tested, and all those kind of things. But when you can ask ChatGPT for anything instantly, it gets lost sometimes that there's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah, true. And I've also noticed that the poor developers who you ask to make a visual of their data model, they're not entirely happy. They already have a whole ticket log behind them, and now they have to suddenly go sit in Miro or something to draw out a few post-it notes. But I think it's sometimes worth the sacrifice.
It's a tricky thing to visualize, to be honest. It doesn't work perfectly or linearly, and it's a tangle web of things that all come together. But if you start with like a star schema of what are your core concepts, you've got customers, you've got purchases, whatever you've got, and then you work from there about what the tables are. Normally makes sense from that X comes from here and Y comes from here, and when you times them together, you get this number. So yeah, maybe we don't do that visually so often, but we'll definitely do that in a data dictionary. And then we're finding that a data dictionary is becoming more and more important, not just from definitions and understanding, but also for teaching AI models. So if you want to talk to your data in the future, that's where it needs to start. And also governance and all of those kind of things as well.
Well, that's exciting. I need to read up about data dictionaries, because that sounds like the next sort of object model communication thing I need to know about.
Unfortunately, it's like a really horrible manual process where your C-suite need to sit down and say, okay, but like, what is lifetime value for us? Which is not the most fun conversation and doesn't always seem so important. But once you've agreed on that thing, it will be agreed upon for years, and your business won't change significantly where you'll then need to define it again. Although I'm sure somebody in sales would like to if their bonus depended on it at some point. So yeah, it's a bit of a awkward manual process, but when you've had that discussion, then you've got the foundations so that everything else can follow. You can model your data along what you've decided is the definition of that data. You can put that in your dashboard. Everything leads from there, basically.
So we started with a question about what is design philosophy. Is what you just described data philosophy?
Maybe. I don't believe that there's such thing as data philosophy or even data strategy, which is bad because my job title is data strategist. But I only think that there's business strategy and data that should ladder up to it. And maybe the problem that I encounter most often is that people don't know what their business strategy is, and so they don't know what data they need.
Yes, I also run into this problem on the design and product side.
Cool. I think this has been a great conversation, Bram. I will thank you very much for joining us on Gin with Gwyn. And if anybody would like to join for a casual conversation about what you do and how you can help others, comment or link below.
Thank you for having me.